Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Maurice Allah Khan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's hot topic for our listeners and viewers this afternoon in the United States, this evening in South Africa, will be another conversation on global challenges, with a special emphasis on what's been unfolding in Afghanistan. We have another special guest for this conversation, Sheikh Khalid Yasin. Now, many of you in South Africa are familiar with Sheikh Khalid. In fact, one of the producers was ecstatic when he learned that our brother was going to be this Sunday's guest. For those of you who don't know who this brother is, Sheikh Khalid Yasin is a senior international consultant and chairman for the Purpose Media Corporation, LLC, and the Purpose of Life Foundation, Incorporated. He has traveled and lectured in more than 130 major cities around the world, including London, Paris, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Jeddah, Kuwait City, Dubai, Muscat, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Sydney, Kuala Lumpur, Beijing, Karachi, Mumbai, Lagos, Abuja, Nairobi, Accra, Cairo, Monrovia, Trinidad, Guyana, and Mexico City. He has lectured in more than 39 international universities and 53 American and Canadian universities in the last 30 years. His topics include removing misconceptions about Islam and Muslims, international ethics, social responsibility, constitutional awareness, and critical issues facing humanity. Sheikh Yasin has been the personal guest of several heads of state and dignitaries in several countries, including Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kenya, Uganda, Liberia, Nigeria, and the Republic of Somaliland. He has also advised several prominent NGOs at the United Nations. He is the president of the Purpose of Life Foundation, a not-for-profit human service organization with offices in the USA, Nigeria, the UK, and the UAE, which have provided him with keen insight and broad experience. His extensive international contacts and exposure makes him an invaluable resource for the Purpose Media Group. And with that as an introduction, let us welcome our brother to the broadcast. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Khalid Yasin.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for sharing my profile. And I'm very glad to be here with you today, brother.
Well, it's good to have you on with us, brother. This is a very challenging time that we're in right now, and we're going to deal with some challenging issues. One in particular, which has grabbed the attention of the entire international community. Before we get into the subject matter for our discussion, Aki, why don't you share with your brother Salah Khan and others in the audience who are familiar with you, what brings you back to the United States, and what kinds of activities have you been involved in of late? Because I think that, the last time before we ran into each other recently at one of the brothers' places in Maryland. My awareness of you and your activities was that you had been abroad for a pretty long extended period of time. So why don't you just share a little bit about what your activities were abroad and what made you decide to come back to the United States, and are you based here permanently now?
Good. Okay. First of all, I'm a native New Yorker, and very few native New Yorkers take claim to any other city in the world. And I have visited all over the world, but I'm a New Yorker. So my concerns, my heart has always been in that area of the United States. And yes, I have been abroad because that's just part of my vision. But I came back recently because I thought to myself that there's an opportunity in the United States of America to foster the greatest amount of collaboration, cooperation towards whether it is social justice or advocacy or business or whatever. I didn't find in any place in the world the opportunity, the constitutional opportunities or the opportunities to address such issues like in the United States of America. So I'm back here now to take advantage of my citizenship, my experience, and second, and lastly, I think maybe even more importantly, I think that the indigenous Muslims, whether they are Hispanic or whether they are European originally or whether they are African American, we have an opportunity now not to just play the back end of the Islamic dynamics here in the United States of America. We have the opportunity to use our talent, to use our experiences, to take the front end experience position, and that's our position. Make no mistakes about it. This is my country. I'm a citizen of this country. I happen also to be a Muslim. And among the 6 million Muslims in America, I want to make sure that my legacy, my great-grandchildren, that my grandchildren, that my children and my generation, and that my mother, who's 98 years old, that they don't have to take their leadership of Islam in the United States of America from somebody from somewhere else. Now, I think that should clarify in a nutshell, kind of like why I'm back here as opposed to being somewhere else, because that's a legacy that belongs to me. And that's a responsibility that belongs to me. And I ask God not to allow me to die while I didn't fulfill reasonably the legacy that he passed on to me, being an American citizen, being an African American, and that whole thing that goes with our experience in the diaspora of the United States.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And, as we speak about legacy, communal legacy, tribal legacy, we as African Americans, we have a very unique sociological experience in this country called America. Very unique, unlike any other tribe in this nation. That unique sociological experience also provides us with a very unique perspective of looking at the world. And the world we are truly a global community. The United States of America is just one patch of earth, part of this global ever shrinking sphere. And as you are well aware as a scholar of Islam, Aki, Allah Ta'ala speaks in the Quran about how we all have been created from one source and we have been made into nations and tribes. But within that scope of that, we have a very unique sociological experience as a tribe within and among the global tribes. Part of that unique experience places a responsibility and obligation on us to speak truth to power in ways that many others are not able to do. And so, you know, for this challenging conversation that you and I are going to have today, I want to set the tone for it with a quote from the late Senator J. William Fulbright, who up until the time of his retirement from the U.S. Senate, he held one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, chairmanship of a committee in the U.S. Senate, the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. He held that seat longer than any other senator had up until that time. I don't know if anyone has eclipsed him since, but he was the longest held incumbent of that seat up until then. And he wrote a book in the twilight of his political career and just a few years before he passed, a book entitled The Arrogance of Power. In that book, he made an observation that I want to share because it will set the tone for the discussion you and I will have going forward. He said there are two Americas. One is the America of Lincoln and Adlai Stevenson. The other is the America of Teddy Roosevelt and the modern super patriots. One is generous and humane. The other narrowly egotistical. One is self-critical. The other is self-righteous. One is sensible. The other romantic. One is good-humored. The other solemn. One is inquiring. The other pontificating. One is moderate. The other filled with passion and intensity. One is judicious and the other arrogant in the use of great power. Now, I would amend that to say that final description to say arrogant and frequently unjust in the use of great power. Now, with that as the foundation for the conversation going forward, I want to show a short video clip, and then inshallah ta'ala, after this clip has ended, I want to get your thoughts on what we saw and heard.
Well, many fear the Taliban will target those linked to the previous administrations. But in the capital, Kabul, the former mayor is still in office, though he's now overseen by a Taliban commission headed by a senior figure in the group. Well, our Afghanistan correspondent, Sultana has been speaking to both men.
Whenever I've spoken to senior Taliban figures in the past, they've always dismissed the previous government as corrupt, as not working for the interests of the people. How can you now be working with members of that same former government?
The previous government was a centre of corruption, but if the regime changes, corruption would disappear, because the people themselves are not corrupt. It's only a small number that want to earn through illegal means.
Some people who are watching this will accuse you of selling out on democratic principles by collaborating with this new system. What would you say to them?
Actually, working for your country, providing services for your country that you were providing is not collaboration with any system. I'm serving people of Kabul. I'm collaborating for the values and principles that I believe in, that is service to my country. I'm not a sellout. If I was a sellout, I'll be sitting on the first airplane and sell this country out. Democratic principles I believe in for Afghanistan, specifically those that fit this country, I still believe in it. I will still fight for it. I'll represent it.
You've said that female employees here can come back to work. Is that going to be permanent? Because many women I speak to are worried that once the international presence ends, they're no longer going to be able to work here, and you're going to implement much more repressive laws on women.
The Taliban has not decided yet what the rules will be on what men and women can and cannot do. But we have already said that women can work within the framework of Sharia. What do we mean by that? They must wear the hijab.
I've heard that there's only around 10%, 15% of your female employees have turned up so far.
You see, the problem is we made a specific announcement. The reality is that they should come to work. If they don't want to come, they will create a void themselves. And those women who work in our workforce are part of a functioning system that they're needed. We have not given women a job as a charity in this organization since I've come.
In the last time the Taliban were in power in the 1990s, you were Minister for Higher Education, and back then women specifically were not able to go to university, women were not able to go to school. So will that be different this time round?
In that time, the security and conditions in Afghanistan were not like today. In that time, women faced so many injustices, women were being kidnapped and beaten and sexually assaulted. Now, things are not like that. Society has developed. Things are better. That is why we are not restricting women.
We've seen these awful, chaotic scenes at Kabul airport. That's because many people have terrible memories of what Taliban rule was like in Kabul in the 1990s. Do you recognize that you made mistakes back then?
For the past 20 years, people have been saying, this is not a country for us. The country developed, but poor people were left behind. Instead of going through the illegal route through Turkey, running the risk of drowning in the sea, people are thinking this is an easier route to cross one wall and go into the airport.
I've spoken to people at the airport, and a lot of them are worried about what life will be like under your rule.
They just want to bolster their immigration cases, so they are saying they are afraid. It's clear in Afghanistan living standards are not good, but in America and Europe it's much better. So if someone can go, they will go.
Interesting. So what are your thoughts on that clip, Sheikh Yasin?
Well, first of all, I think that the interviewer, either he's very politically immature, or otherwise he's asking the questions that were given to him. So maybe the organization that young man represents gave him a list of questions to ask. And so that he's just delivering the questions. But if he himself, as an interviewer, came up with those kinds of standardized stigma-based questions, that sets up, that was called a prejudicial assumptive interview. A prejudicial assumptive interview. So he's asking the person questions about what happened in the past. Is this going to be a continuation? So let me say this. I don't subscribe in any way to the so-called cruelties and violations of human rights and Islamic rights that are done by regimes in the course of their taking control of their areas or their lands or their countries, including the Taliban or including, you understand me, anyone else. In the course of war, insurrection, and other kinds of things, crimes are done from both sides. And we have to be very honest about that. But that should not be our concern at this point. You know, how cruel the Taliban are supposed to be, quote unquote. You know, well, Americans are cruel. You know, they're just cruel maybe emotionally. You know, they might be cruel, you understand me, from a mental point of view, through creating anxiety and grief on people. And they're very cruel in terms of their occupation of countries that they have been to. That's our history as Americans. But we don't judge America from that. We judge America based upon the opportunities and that it's a sovereign country. So also I have to judge, to be fair, I have to judge the Afghanis, the Taliban, and the people of Afghanistan. That's their country. Now, who's ruling it right now? Who took charge right now? That's subjective. That's their country. They have a right to set the tone for their country and to set up, judicial infrastructure for their country based upon the interests of their country and their culture and their religion. And so some little young guy journalist talking like he's talking is inappropriate. That's number one. Number two, he has some assumptive ideas that's been given to him by people who already have those kinds of thoughts about the Afghanistan or the Taliban or any of the Muslims seeking their source of social, religious, sovereignty or justice or whatever. So I'm an advocate for social justice. I'm an advocate for what Malcolm said, by any means necessary. That doesn't mean that we violate God's law. That doesn't mean that we violate human rights. We don't mean that we violate ethics. No, we don't violate. We don't have the intent to violate anything like that. But when we are being occupied, when we're being unjustifiably punished and denied or enslaved or killed or bombed or whatever the case might be, we have to get that off our backs, and we have to get these people out of our country by any means necessary. Now, once we take over our country, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about anybody like that Taliban. If they succeeded in taking over their country, which at this point they did, after 40 years, not the Taliban, but the Afghani people, they suffered 40 years of war. Maybe 5 generations of people know nothing except war. Just like the Palestinians, but they don't have that infrastructure. If the Palestinians had that infrastructure, they would have solved their situation in the same way, but they don't have the infrastructure. And nobody has a problem about those who deny the Palestinians that infrastructure. Nobody nobody questions the bestiality and the criminality, okay, and the inhumanness that Israel represents. Nobody questions that at all for 60 years. But all of a sudden, a group of guys who would think to be ragtag, who would think against all odds, because they managed to get the finishing job. That's what the Taliban did. They did the finishing job. You know, pushing Americans out, that's the finishing job. That wasn't how it started. Now, since they finished up the job that took 40 years, I say, God bless them. We ask Almighty God, as Muslims, bless them to be better than they were. We ask Almighty God to bless them to be better than other Muslims are who claim to be free. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them for any violations that they did regarding Islam. And we ask Allah to forgive them, and we ask the whole human community to forgive the Taliban for whatever things they did to get where they are. But that's their country, and that's their right. And nobody has the right to even question that issue based upon some hearsay or how long has it been? The Taliban has now been in rule of their country, I think maybe now around, 12 days? And people are putting justice on them? You know, this doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
That's their country. And as a human being, I say that if Almighty, we would have done it different. We in America, we're not no Taliban followers. And we in America, we're not no Hamas followers. And we're not impressed, you understand me, with people who use guns and take hostages and chop off heads. We've never been a part of that. So I'm answering not as a person having feelings towards that, but I'm a person for human justice wherever it is. And I think today there are some people who are fearing for their lives in Afghanistan, and they have a reason for fearing for their lives, and I'm not a judge in that. But I think for the most part, the people of Afghanistan, they are rejoicing today that they have somebody who came to their aid and to bring their country back to them. And maybe 20 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe we can revisit this and judge and see whatever. But it's only been 10 or 12 days.
Mm-hmm. You know, your response reminded me of a couple of things. First, I recently had on this program for an interview. I think it was last Sunday. We had Muazzam Beg and Dr. Tariq Ramadan, and we were having a discussion on global issues. And one of the things that Muazzam, one of the observations that he made, which was a very telling observation, he said, one of the things, this is a quote, one of the things that the Taliban was doing very efficiently in their cause, we're talking about after they were forcibly removed by the United States 20 years ago, in the opinion of many of us, unjustly, arrogantly. He said one of the things that the Taliban was doing very efficiently in their cause was dispensing justice, settling disputes in a very simple, unadulterated, and unbureaucratic way without bribery, without corruption. And this is one of the things that endeared the Taliban to the hearts and minds of the vast majority, in my humble opinion, of the Afghan people outside of the centers, like Kabul and what have you. This is what endeared them to many of the people. They trusted them. They had more trust and more confidence in the justice that was dispensed according to the Sharia by the Taliban in settling disputes, minor disputes up to major disputes. Again, and being free of bribery and corruption, that it, to me, and in my humble opinion, looking at it from a distance, I think this was one of the reasons why it was so easy for them to quote unquote reconquer territory with very little opposition. But with that said, there's another point that I want to touch upon. In response to what you said, you raised the issue of occupied Palestine and the Palestinians and that ongoing struggle that's been going on for decades upon decades. It reminded me of a social media post I recently saw. I don't remember if it was on Facebook or Twitter. I think it was Twitter, where a commentator said, the Taliban took control of their country, and the whole world goes berserk, while the Zionists took control of another people's country, and there's nothing but silence, and unfortunately also a very corrupting acquiescence on the part of the international community. Part of this, Aki, has to do with the propaganda, which has been very, very effective. The propaganda has been very, very effective globally, and also within the more urbanized population centers of Afghanistan. It's been very heavy, and it reminded me of the late George Orwell in an observation that he made in his homage to Catalonia. I'm gonna share the quote. He said, early in life, I noticed that no event is correctly reported in a newspaper. But in Spain, for the first time, I saw newspaper reports which did not bear any relation to the facts, not even the relationship that is implied in an ordinary lie. I saw great battles reported where there had been no fighting, and complete silence where hundreds of men had been killed. And I saw newspapers in London retailing these lies, and eager intellectuals building emotional superstructures over events that had never happened. I saw, in fact, history being written not in terms of what happened, but of what ought to have happened according to various party lines, end quote. And this is from this once celebrated novelist and essayist, George Orwell, who died in 1950. When I think about these words against the backdrop of the disinformation age that we're in right now, and how it has impacted how we see and how we react to news and information pertaining to catastrophic upheavals like we're witnessing in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world. What are your thoughts on propaganda and its use?
Okay, first of all, I appreciate that anecdote that you shared with us from George Orwell. I read George Orwell and did some essays on two of his books. One is Animal Farm, and the other one was 1984. I think that was the name of it. So I'm familiar with him, and I understand his sort of thinking. What I want to say to yourself, Sheikh Mori, and to your listeners, is that I know how to talk intellectually. In order to get along with intellectuals and to interact with intellectuals, you have to at least have some intellectual capability. However, I don't like, I don't enjoy very much intellectualizing issues, because the people that suffer from those issues, the people that are involved in those issues, they very rarely benefit from the intellectualization of it. So I prefer to be like a social activist. So I could appreciate the intellectual perspectives and discussions and all of that there, but I like to be in the nitty gritty. I like to put on my black gloves and my Timberland boots and my cap, whatever it is, and get out there and roll up my sleeves and be in it, so to speak. I like Malcolm's approach to that, and I like other people's approach to be in it, to win it, so to speak. So let me answer that issue from this perspective, from what I just said. Again, wrongs must be righted. Anybody that's doing something that's wrong in the world, consider this morally wrong, it's criminally wrong, it's wrong, then it's set up to be corrected. That's the justice that God set up. So the issue that you just referred to about the tragedy of Palestine, the tragedy of the Palestinian people, that tragedy is viewed by people to be whatever they want to view it as. But in the sight of God, in the sight of history, in the sight of morality, it's a criminal act. The fact that it's perpetuated through further criminal engagement is still a criminal act.
That's right.
One group of people giving away the land of another group of people to another group of people, that doesn't even have no place in history, except when it came to the Balfour Declaration, the partitioning of Palestine, the invasion and criminal occupation. That never happened anymore, especially it wasn't perpetuated and accepted to be normal. So anyone can say, while Jewish people are our cousins, ideologically, scripturally, the Zionists, I don't even think they have relatives. So having said that, we are anti-Zionists. Whether the Zionists express their feelings in America, whether they express their feelings in Belgrade, or they express their opinion, whatever it is, we are against Zionism as moral-minded people, as scriptural people, as decent people. Okay, we are against Zionism. So if the head of Zionism right now, the political expression of Zionism, if that is the state of Israel, the world of morality should take that as an opposition. That's what I believe. And ideologically, as American, I thank God to be an American, because one thing I can do, I can differ with my country, and I can certainly differ with another country, okay, who I know that they ain't got my interest in at all. And by the way, brothers and sisters, I visited Palestine for the first time in 1970. And I was appalled at what I saw then. And things have already escalated since that time. So, I'm more than appalled at this situation. And the fact that, there are now global players, including Muslims, joining into the oppression of the Palestinian people, that's more appalling than that. But then that's another 21st century phenomena that needs to be discussed.
Mm-hmm. I want to share with our with you, first of all, Sheikh Khalid, Yasin, and also the viewing audience, another video. But before I do, I want to say something about it. There was this young, very impressive parliamentarian in the British Parliament that addressed briefly the crisis in Afghanistan, and she, in her brief remarks, she referenced the unfortunate history. She briefly referenced the history that America and the tale when it comes to issues like this, especially during the time of Tony Blair, as it pertained to this so-called war on terrorism. The tail of the dog, how it responded, and it's quite interesting, especially given, again, the bellicose kind of remarks that are coming out of our government from the highest office. So, you know, following the recent terrorist attack in Afghanistan, President Biden has been widely quoted in news media saying, quote, "We will not forgive, we will not forget, we will hunt you down and make you pay." Now, as far as I know, I'm trying to follow the reports as closely as I can. There have already been at least 2 drone strikes. Whenever there's a drone strike committed by U.S. forces, I always automatically wonder how many innocents were killed in that strike, how many innocents were killed. But getting back to Biden, he was echoing the same arrogant, any Muslim will do retaliatory spirit that was exemplified by Bush and company after 9/11. This is a spirit that we in the Black community know only too well. Some called it Confederate justice. You know, back in the day, if you couldn't find the Black man who committed the offense, real or imagined, the fallback attitude was any nigger will do. In fact, entire communities would often be destroyed. We have Black Wall Street, we have Rosewood, we have Winston-Salem, North Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. So with that said, I want us to see this clip of this young, very young British parliamentarian addressing some of the contradictions that have engulfed not only Uncle Sam, the United States of America, but her own country as well.
War on Afghanistan shows you can't deliver democracy with bomb and bullets.
War in Afghanistan, this House has an obligation to learn its lessons and to ensure its mistakes are never repeated. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to start by stating a hard but clear truth that some in this House do not want to hear. The 20-year war on Afghanistan was a mistake of catastrophic proportions, causing untold human tragedy. 240,000 people killed, men, women and children, tens and thousands of innocent Afghan civilians, and 457 British personnel. This House must never again send British service personnel to die in futile wars. Mr. Deputy Speaker, rather than repeating the mistakes of the past, we must learn this lesson for the future. The West cannot build liberal democracies with bombs and bullets. That dangerous fantasy, cooked up by neoconservative fanatics in Washington and championed by their faithful followers in London, has brought untold death and destruction to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to Libya and many other places in wars that have made us all unsafe. So today, we must rid ourselves of the delusion that the answer to failed intervention is yet more intervention, and dispense with the belief that freedom abroad and safety at home can be won through wars and regime change. Mr. Deputy Speaker, after all of this bloodshed, we have a special duty to the people of Afghanistan. Today, as Afghans flee for their lives, with heartbreaking images of people desperately clinging onto planes, hoping that the sky is safer than the land, and Afghan asylum seekers already here, they must be provided with unconditional amnesty. And on this issue, I want to raise with the government again the case of my constituent Jamal and his father. Jamal was a translator for the British Army for 6 years, and his father worked as a gardener in a British base. While Jamal made it safely to Coventry, a proud city of sanctuary, his father has been denied relocation and is still in Afghanistan in grave danger. I've written to the Secretary of State, but I haven't received a reply. So today, I urge the government to act immediately and provide safe passage for Jamal's father and all Afghans who are facing that threat from the Taliban. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the war on Afghanistan was the first war on terror. I was just 7 years old when British airstrikes hit that country. The now Prime Minister, a few years later, wrote, and I quote, "We are in Afghanistan to teach them the value of democracy." Today, after 20 years of bloodshed, it is incumbent on us to learn that democracy cannot be bombed into existence, that American military might is no friend of freedom, and to ensure that this first war on terror is Britain's last war of aggression. Thank you.
That was a very impressive presentation that young sister gave in the parliament. Just 27 years old, man. Clearly, I believe she's Afghani, but you know, if she isn't, she is definitely of South Asian ancestry. Probably either born and raised or raised in the UK. What are your thoughts on what she had to say, my brother?
Most certainly, her statements. First of all, I think she made some very praiseworthy, courageous, very classical observations. So she's done her studies. She's probably, yes, probably Afghani. I would think so. She speaks with that kind of passion. And I would follow. I think that I think her summarization of things from a social political point of view, in terms of her being subjectively Afghanistani and all of that, is correct and accurate. However, I want to stay away from, and I want to be very careful as an American citizen. And I want to say this here to your viewers, and I want to make some things plain. I'm not anti-American. I'm not against my government. And I'm not allowing anybody to generalize. I'm not allowing anyone to generalize the criminality of the United States of America, because there is a criminal element, even if it is a dominant criminal element, a sustained criminal element based on conspiracy or protracted, whatever you want to call it. I understand that, but as an American, I am a beneficiary of the privileges and the rights that's extended to all Americans through the American Constitution. That's what allows us to be able to express ourselves. That's what allows us to have a television station, a radio station, to print newspapers and books, and to say whatever we want to say. And somebody's not going to come knocking on our door and lock us up tomorrow like it would happen in other places in the world. So I want to make a distinction here and make it clear that if someone in their own analysis puts puts incrimination against my government as a general thing because it's the American government, I don't accept that, because there's a part of the government, there's an element of the government, whether it be, you understand me, a dominant element or not. There's a element of the government, but that doesn't mean all the people in government share that sentiment, and that doesn't mean all Americans who are proud of their country share that sentiment. And so I'm an American, and I'm for social justice and for giving the rights back to all people wherever they are. And any criminal things that my country has done, is doing, perpetuating, I'm against that. But at the same token, I never went anywhere in the world and incriminated my government. I want to say that point. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that I don't want to be incriminating also other governments, except if they're blatant, like Israel. Israel is a blatantly criminal government from its inception all the way until now. So I don't have a problem in talking about that. Not Jews, but Zionists. And I think this young lady was, she was courageous. What she had to say was politically accurate and surgical. And she was very courageous to say that in that particular circle. But guess where she said it? She said it in the British Parliament. That's where she can say that. She didn't say that somewhere else. She said it there. That's because she's a privileged person. Whether she's Afghani or not, she's privileged. And on one side, we should be grateful that we are privileged. But at the same token, we should realize that we have a greater responsibility, okay, to right wrongs since we have that privilege. And so I would say that I could use what she says as fuel. If I want to talk to people, I'm going to take what she has and do just what you just did. Hey, you want to hear this thing summarized real nice? Listen to this. That's what you did, and I appreciate it. Me and you couldn't have said it better. Why? Because she's probably Afghani. Secondly, she's in the what do you call it? She's in the British Parliament, and she's a parliamentarian. Now, you and I can do the same thing. We don't need to be a parliamentarian to say it in America. Beautiful, alhamdulillah. And you've been saying it. I read 2 of your books. I don't know if you wrote more than 2, but I read both of your books. So I'm a person who loves to read and follow, and then take it and put it into perspective and keep it moving. That young lady, she was surgical. That's what we call it. I don't necessarily agree with all of her, equations. I don't necessarily agree with all the equations, but I agree with the basic delivery, the facts that she shared with us, and her vitality, her commitment, her fearlessness. I don't think I could have said it better. Maybe somebody could put some little rap to it or put some songs to it. Maybe I could say it better then, but in the place where she was, I doubt if there's another 2 or 3 people in that parliament that could have said that.
Interesting. I agree with you in large part. I'm someone who makes a distinction between the government and America and its people. I support the government when the government is doing right. And I clearly speak out strongly against the government when the government is doing wrong. And I subscribe, especially in my human rights work, to the spirit that was, first of all, that comes from Islam. Allah Ta'ala in the Quran enjoins upon us, instructs us, mandates for that we as committed Muslims must stand firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even if it is against ourselves. That's first and foremost. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, when you see an evil action, change it with your hand. If you cannot do so with your tongue, the jihad of the tongue, like this young parliamentarian was just doing. If you cannot do so, detest it within your heart, and that is the weakest degree of faith. Now, along with that, we have, the insightful views of persons from history, and I often reference them in my work, in my speeches, in my writings. Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullah alayh, who said civilization is based on justice, and the consequences of oppression are devastating. Therefore, it is said, Allah aids the just state, even if it is non-Muslim, and withholds his help from the oppressive state, even if it is Muslim. And then Thomas Jefferson, who on his memorial right here in Washington, D.C., visited by tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people each year from around the world. One of the inscriptions on the wall of his memorial, I tremble for my country. When I reflect, God is just. His justice cannot sleep forever. Saying essentially the same thing that Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah was saying. So, Jefferson also said one of the highest forms of patriotism is dissent. So we have a responsibility, and especially those of us who come from a unique sociological experience like we as African Americans do. We have a responsibility to enjoin the good and forbid the evil in whatever possible way we can, both near, within our own home, and far in other areas around the world where we can reach nothing else with our voice. With that, we're going to play I want to show one last video. And this video, it touches upon what your brother Salah Khan, the observation that I just made, and also it connects with the second video that we saw. What if, there's a telling quote in this. What if I went into your neighborhood, into your neighbor's yard, and shot their dog and told them you hired me to do that? I mean, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting. SubhanAllah. So let's see this and then get your reaction to what this this either he's a middle or the senior Caucasian non-Muslim male American has to say about some of America's outrages.
What if I went into your neighbor's yard, shot their dog, and told them that you hired me to do that? If you live in the United States, that is what your government is doing to you right now. They're going into country after country. While the mainstream press is strangely silent, they're going to Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Pakistan, Turkey, Libya, and others. They're simply bombing whatever they want to bomb, killing whoever they want to kill, destroying whatever they choose to destroy without legal grounds, without the agreement of other nations, in blatant violations of international treaties back as far as Geneva Convention. We are the new global villain. And your flag, your face, is becoming the symbol for those campaigns. As Germany was in 1939, America is today, bringing unprovoked horror and death to a host of countries, countless communities where no threat of any kind to our nation has been demonstrated in any public way. Our military, our government, that corporate deep state that the mainstream media seems to be unable to even speak of, are committing those acts of war, actually war crimes, in your name. They have shot your neighbor's dog, and it looks like you are okay with that. Just as the German people cheered for Hitler, Americans are thinking that these inexcusable actions are somehow going to make them safe, when the opposite is absolutely guaranteed. By these endless atrocities, our military is not only inviting more and more terrorism, they are causing Russia and China and all their allies to align against us, just as the world aligned against Germany and Japan in World War II. Tragic history has shown us that it was not just the German government and leaders who were taken down. Common German people were humiliated, starved, tortured, and killed after World War II. The German people themselves, men, women, and children, were blamed and punished for what their elected leaders had done. If you are not on the record opposing the United States global tyranny and wholesale slaughter of innocent foreigners on their own soil, you are likely to become a target yourself sometime in the future. Do you look like an American? Imagine what would happen if you set foot in a Muslim country which has been bombed or invaded by our military. When someone has pulled their dead children out of their crumbled masonry houses, how do you think those people will treat you if they ever come face to face with you? Any war is bad enough, but the kind of war that the United States is conducting is the worst of the worst. One-sided bullying, unprovoked invasion, exploitation of other countries' resources under the pretense of weaponized political crusades against randomly selected targets. Innocent populations losing their homes, their lives, their loved ones, and many of them having no idea why it is even happening. There's no amount of propaganda, diplomacy, or foreign aid that can come close to repairing what our military is doing and has done. There is no rationalization which can reasonably be put forward to claim that our young soldiers are dying and losing their limbs for any good cause. Are we also brainwashed that we can't even utter an anti-war opinion while this is going on? The Confederate flag is being banned everywhere in our country because, to many, it represents slavery, bigotry, and injustice. The Nazi flag is a symbol of genocide. What does the American flag represent to the rest of the world now that we have flown that flag, as we have invaded their countries, destroyed their homes, and killed their friends and loved ones? How will our flag be regarded by the world from now on? You will see a time when simply flying that flag that you are so proud of will make you a target by the people who have already been visited by our military, our corporate-controlled deep state, our mercenary killers who have plundered and destroyed their countries, their lives, their cultures, and societies, while those invaders flew that flag you love so much. Alone, I cannot stop our military, our Congress, our president, and the unaccountable deep state from invading these countries. That is why I am bringing this message out, in the hope that all Americans will wake up and see themselves as the rest of the world sees us. You and I will be blamed We will be held accountable. We will be targets for revenge, hate, and retribution, you and I, if we don't get major anti-war and anti-imperialism movements going in the United States, movements that are powerful enough to move the mountain of globalist, imperialist greed and violence by our government. When the world comes to our doorstep looking for payback, looking for justice, at least I can point to this video I made. What will you be able to point to that you did? If we don't get together in large numbers and do large things that cause large changes in our national policies and conduct, we do not have a very bright future.
That, it's that Caucasian non-Muslim elder, his message, and messages like that coming from both young and old in this country is what gives your brother Salah Khan reason for hope and optimism, Aki. I have for many years engaged in this human rights work as a matter of love. And part of that love is love of country. I love this country, and part of loving your country is not waving a flag. It's helping your country to live up to the better part of itself, forcing it if necessary. And this is part of the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his last divinely sent messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In fact, the Prophet said, by the one in whose hand rests my soul, you must surely enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Otherwise, it is expected that Allah will send against you a punishment, and you will supplicate him, but your supplications will not be answered. And so, subhanAllah, we have got to, we have to use the jihad of the tongue if we can't do anything else, and push back on the evils that this elder just alluded to, that are being done in our name and under our flag. With that said, I want to give you the final word, my brother. And what say you, Sheikh Khalid Yasin?
Okay. First of all, I've heard that rhetoric before, and as a seemingly middle class, social activist, conscious, fairly educated person. The gentleman seemed to be speaking for a broad spectrum of Americans. That's what I think. I believe that a broad spectrum of Americans think just like him, even if they don't say that. Okay, and they're in a position to do more, faster than you and I could on the basis of our social activism, only because of the leverage only and the history. The other thing I want to say is that, however, there's something there missing. And the part that's missing from our perspective, okay, is that our Prophet ﷺ was never given the license, the permission, or the responsibility to get involved with social justice until he was in Medina. That's what people need to understand as Muslims. Allah never gave the Prophet ﷺ the right to deal with social justice, righting wrongs, enjoining the right, forbidding the wrong, speaking about it, going out in the public, standing up, getting with people and talking to the power. He didn't allow the Prophet ﷺ to do that in Mecca for divine reasons, that if we study the Seerah, we can see why. That's number one. Number two, when the Prophet ﷺ came into Medina, that was a different platform. That was the beginning of a social political platform. That was the first position of his being, the suggestions of his being a leader. The next of his being recognized as a leader of Medina. And then after that, creating a pact between the believers. And then after that, writing a pact for Medina, where he virtually became the governor and the arbiter of that pact. When did that happen? That happened in the 14th year of his prophecy. The 14th year of his prophecy. I'm sorry. The 14th year of his prophecy. I'm sorry, excuse me. The 17th year of his prophecy. Now, moving on to say that the issues of jihad, social justice, speaking truth to power, organizing, creating solidarity, speaking to issues, social activism, all of this happened within the spectrum of the last 4 years of the prophet, the last 5 years, of his life and his prophecy. That should say to us is that if we haven't arrived at a place where we have some leverage, I'm sorry, are we still, am I still live?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good. Until we arrive at a point that we have some reasonable social, political, economic leverage, because if we don't have social, political, and economic leverage, then maybe we're entering an arena where not only are we outnumbered, okay, but we are outspent, okay, and that we are outthought. And I don't want to be with a group of losing people who are outthought, outspent, and secondly, they don't have, any real authority. So from this point of view, I believe that what our priorities among the social political awareness and speaking truth to power and all of that, I would think that we need to consider this, and this is what your brother Sheikh Khalid Yasin, what I'm about. Okay, I think that Muslims should be, and I'm talking here from America, first of all, not in terms of what's happening around the world. The way that we could affect things around the world is if we could affect things where we are. If we could affect things where we are, that ripple will be felt all over the world. So this is how I think that we can correct things where we are. We can do what all other Americans have the right to do. We could buy land and we could migrate, or each one of us could just buy land and use that as an influence where we are. We could farm, we could bring our people together, our communities, our constituencies, but it's based upon first land. Now, if nobody's talking about land and they're a social activist, if they're talking about land and they are a political activist group, if they're not talking about land, that means that they don't have the means by which to be able to arrive at a position of authority or power, except through maybe insurrection. And I'm against insurrection, but I'm against insurrection done by white Americans, wealthy Americans, conspiratorial Americans. I'm against that because Islam is against that. And I'm against Muslims seeking power and authority without themselves vesting in the land, without themselves complying with the government, without themselves going through the stages that all of the people went through in America to get power. So I want to, as a Muslim, I want to go through whatever everybody went through to get power. I want leverage. I want influence for Islam. And how I want to do that? I want to see if we can invest in land, if we can set up our own banks, we can set up our own investment in development corporations. If we can consolidate our vote behind a leader that we respect, we give our vote to that leader, so to speak. So if we got the vote and we got some money and we own some land, we are on the way to be able to speak truth to power. But if we don't have some of those elements, all we can do is write, all we can do is speak, all we can do is rally. Okay, let's do that. But the Prophet ﷺ at the end, Allah didn't tell him to speak, to rally, to march. He didn't tell him just to talk. No, it leads to action. And for action, you got to have some substance. And so I'm with Sheikh, I'm with my brother, Sheikh Modi Salih Khan. I'm with him as what I know about him and about his thinking and all of that there. But I think that people, other brothers and sisters need to join in with that from even a more practical point of view. You know, we need to go out here and see how many businessmen and women are willing to support this idea. We need to go out and find out how many intellectuals can support this idea and how many allies that we can get who are non-Muslims, like the Prophet ﷺ had his uncle, and the Prophet ﷺ had others who were his allies. We need to get those allies online with us. So when we got those allies, we got our own resources, and we own some land, and we in compliance with the government, and we are stakeholders. I think that we're on our way to do something, brother Salih Khan, and I'm with you in that. And maybe I'm just speaking a different, what do you call it? I'm speaking a different face to the same issue. It's like if you and I were standing back to back, your view would be one thing, and my view would be the other, and your 180 degrees would be one, and my 180 degrees would be the other. So I hope that the brothers and sisters who's listening, they understand that he got 180 degrees, and what he's saying, I got the other 180 degrees. I'm talking about figuratively speaking. So we're not in disagreement. We're back to back. just that we seeing the enemy from a different point of view. We seeing the opportunities from a different view. And that's the diversity that Islam gives to us. And I believe that one day, may not be in the next 10 years or 20 years, but I believe that Muslims in America, just like the 6 million Mormons in America, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, just like the 6 million Mormons in America got their own state and they have their own economy and they got a special, unique voice in America. I believe that one day that same thing is going to happen with us.
Okay. I want to thank you, my brother. We are at the end of our time, and it has been as I expected it to be, an invigorating and thought-provoking discussion. MashaAllah ta'ala. Inshallah, we're going to have you back and continue this dialogue on global issues and how it pertains to the unique challenges and opportunities that we face here in this neck of the global woods. With that said, I want to thank you, Sheikh.
My dear brother, you don't mind just quickly in 30 seconds, for people who would like to know what my views are on these kinds of subjects, I wrote a book. It's called Islam, America, and the World. It's on Amazon. Okay, if you contact me through Sheikh Salakan, I don't mind to send the viewers a PDF, so you can at least, you can see. Or you can go to KhalidYasin.com.
KhalidYasin.com. Okay, alhamdulillah. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll post that information as well when we post the video later. After we post the video, inshallah ta'ala, we'll add that information, contacts for you, and no doubt we had a lot of folk via different platforms that saw this live internationally, and there are going to be many more who will see it after the fact.
Inshallah. May Allah bless
Video
you.
will be posted, inshallah.
May Allah give you long life, brother.
I mean, and you, Aki. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to close as we usually do with Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Wa tawassaw bil haqq. Wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily, humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.